This episode of Better Every Shift is sponsored by Verizon Frontline, the advanced network for first responders on the front line. Learn more at verizon.com/frontline. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Cebollero, host of the Inside EMS podcast, and I am honored today to host a special crossover edition on this 911 memorial show with Jim Dudley, host of Policing Matters, Aaron Zamzow, host of Better Every Shift, of course, and myself from Inside EMS. And we are going to have a great discussion about what 9/11 has meant and how we can prepare in the future to ensure that these events never happen again, or that we're better prepared. So let's go ahead and get into that show right now. So Jim, if I go to you first and ask you, just from the police side, and we think about 9/11, I mean, what's the feeling now? Kind of as we thought about this, we've got a whole generation now that's coming into the workforce that wasn't even alive when this happened. Of course, they know, they're learning about it in school. But now as we start to think about the feeling of 9/11 from the police side, what does it mean?
Yeah, well, you have a point, but I think it's partially being taught in school, and there are different history revisionists out there talking about different things. But I think 22 years post 9/11, a lot of things have changed. We had so much great support by the people in the community, by legislators, good support, good backing, police, fire, EMS. And I think we saw so much of that erode over the last 20 years, so much more over the last decade, especially on the police side of public safety. And so when we should really be embracing the technology that's out there available to us, we are shunning it in a lot of regions across the country. We've had some states ban things like artificial intelligence or crime mapping or facial recognition systems that could really be helping us. As far as the police, yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of young cops out there who it may have happened when they were alive, but they might have been 2, 3, 4. And so I don't think they have that that real perception that we did from being professionals working when 9/11 happened, and the impact that had on us and on a nation that wasn't ready for it, wasn't prepared to handle the psychological impact of it. But on that day, there was stunned people out there, and then public safety went right into action. Fire, certainly, police, certainly, EMS, doing everything they could to save lives and evacuate people from really hazardous situations. And the toll, especially on firefighters, has still been seen over the years, over the decades, on their health. And we've lost a lot of good people because of the ramifications from those rescues. But I think right now police officers are well trained. They are ICS trained. They use ICS for events, planned events, spontaneous events, used to mitigate circumstances of maybe a mass casualty incident, a mass shooter, or things like that. And I think we're going forward. Talked with Eric O'Neill on my podcast from Raytom, who is training police officers to be fully EMS trained. And I think that is just something long overdue and a force multiplier for fire and EMS as well. So some good things, but some drawbacks indeed.
And I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that we talk about now is, augmenting the first responders. Of course, I'm going to talk to Zam and ask him the same question here. But one of the things, they got the average on scene time of 4 minutes, same as police. And if we can start to think about delivering aid as quick as we can, I think that that's a great place to be. But Zam, I want to give you the same thought now when we think about 9/11. And certainly, fire had such a big impact. We saw the FDNY running into these buildings knowing that they may not come out, and the selflessness that really went into that. What's the lesson, or what are firefighters now thinking, kind of along the same lines of a generation now is coming in that may have been 2, 3, 4, as Jim said, and keeping this legacy going?
Yeah, I think and Jim touched on it too. One of the things that we're seeing now 22 years past is not only just the event, but then all the cleanup, and then dealing with the mental health side of that too. I think some of the things that I still see that that 9/11 has really helped with the fire service. I believe that one is it really brought forth, more of the cancer initiatives, because a lot of those individuals that were on the mound cleaning and working those tireless hours to try to do what they could, a lot of them have come down with cancer. I mean, the numbers there are astronomical, and I think that's brought not only an awareness but research towards, at least on the fire side, what we're going into as far as environments. The other side of that is the mental health toll that it's taken, years down the road, people having to deal with going to 150 funerals, and it's brought those kind of issues to the forefront so that we talk about them a lot more. And hopefully the police have kind of seen that as well, where, it's mass casualty incidents like this that, I think bring out some of the best things. And I'm carefully wording this, of course. The incident itself is horrific, but you see just what we do. We saw firefighters run into that building, and there were police officers there too that were in harm's way, trying to get people out of there, and that's what we do. And now we're seeing, hey, even though we do that, there are harms beyond just that physical incident, and so the awareness that was brought to that, I think, both on the police and the fire side, is still prevalent today, and it's growing and advancing. On the other side of that, you had mentioned it's 22 years removed, and there's a lot of our younger population, younger generation, that has their own perception of what happened on 9/11. There are some great media outlets that really help to preserve that, but I think it's up to us to really tap into those that were still there, and make sure that we understand just the broad scale of how it's affected us. Back in the day, right after 9/11, fire trucks, anybody driving a fire truck down, if you had lights and sirens on, like the wall, like everyone parted, and we don't see that anymore. Police, I'm sure, the same way, right? Like now, all of a sudden, in some cases, we're the bad guys. And, after that event, it was the exact opposite. So, it's a cyclical kind of thing, right? We're still seeing the effects of it in the fire service. One thing that Jim mentioned, and I think you'll probably touch on, is just, ICS and incident command. I think there's some positive that it's taken us a long time, but now police and fire are starting to become on the same page during these incidents, a lot more. But, like I said, I don't like to call it an anniversary. It's the markings. It's a, historical event. And anybody listening, I think if you have young ones, teach them about that event, just for the sake of history, and to keep the memories alive of all those people that perished that day.
Yeah, and I think that's the really tough part of this is really and I'm with you. I said anniversary too when we were talking, but an anniversary is that of celebration, and maybe it should be a celebration. Maybe it should be a celebration of professionalism. Maybe should be a celebration of dedication. Maybe it should be a celebrate, whatever it is. But, from an EMS side, I think some of the things that we're seeing is the forgetfulness of what that meant. Right. But more importantly, are we prepared for when it happens in our communities next? Right. And we think about things that have transpired. Certainly the terrorists attacked, and we were very, very worried about that. Then we had the challenges with the anthrax, and, we were really kind of hyper vigilant in trying to make sure. And I think that we've kind of gotten away from that, but the point that you guys have made that I just don't want to gloss over is that there are people that are still dying because of this incident some 20 years later, right? And I think now what we have to think about as a career field in EMS, as a career field in fire, as a career field for our police brethren, what do we have to be able to ensure that this legacy prevails? I was in New York City in March, and I had the opportunity to, or maybe it was May, I can't remember, I'm getting old, guys, but I had the opportunity to go to the 9/11 memorial. I grew up in New York City. And I got to see the Twin Towers every day when I left my home, and I knew that it was there. We would hang out there. We would go to the stores underneath. You were able to walk for blocks underneath those buildings. You know, there was a restaurant at the top. My friend asked his wife to marry him at the top and windows of the world. And now when we think about what we have today, we have memories, but do we really have the memories that keep us from reliving this type of event again? You know, I'd like to think we are, but I mean, Jim, when we think about this from a police side and preparation, you talked about ICS. I want you to touch on that a little bit. You know, I just want to, and I keep going back. We're talking about history. And, you know, in 2001, we had this event. You know, the president came out and said, everybody's got to be ICS certified. We have to have the 200 and 300 and 400. And in 2014, I had the opportunity to lead the medical branch of the Ferguson event in Ferguson, Missouri. And the first thing that I kept saying is, who's in charge here? Who's in charge here? Who's in charge here? And it took forever for incident command to be set up for us to follow all those things. And I can't think after all these years that it's gotten any better, but I'm babbling, Jim. Let me go ahead and give it back to you.
Well, I mean, I think it starts with leadership at all levels, but leadership at every agency, for the chief or the sheriff or the fire chief or the EMS chief to say, we are dedicated to this. Small events, draw it in the dust on the back of your radio car, pull out a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, put it up on a whiteboard, or pull out your command van and run it the way it should be, with an incident commander or a joint unified command, and then break it down into ops, logistics, finance, and what am I missing? Operations, planning, logistics, and admin finance, right? So break it down and practice it over and over again, because it's got to be second nature when the big one hits. And like I said, we've used it at mass casualty incidents, at shootings. I could think of a couple off the top of my head where we use them, but we, just like Aaron said, we are getting that cohesiveness where we are recognizing roles. We're not meeting our opposite number on the battlefield anymore. We know them. We've done exercises and training, and the economic factor should not be a factor. FEMA puts out 100, 200, 700, 800 for free, and the law enforcement agencies, many more subsets beyond that. So if you are an agency, you're listening to this podcast, if you're not practicing ICS, find out why and explain to your chief, sheriff, it's free. We got to do it. We should start doing it now. And I think the leadership aspect goes beyond that. It is about sending out annual reminders when these events happen, whether they're a local event or a national event like 9/11, to remember and never forget. We said we would never forget, but I don't know if across the country we're holding true to that motto.
Yeah. And I think my biggest fear with that, and, you know, you gave us a little icing on the cake there, is, you know, Pearl Harbor Day, right? What does Pearl Harbor Day mean? Back when these people lived through Pearl Harbor Day, I mean, they were just, my mom, I mean, she was, you know, talked about it like it happened in the backyard, and we lived in New York City, right? But the same thing with 9/11, right? That's how we were living. That's how we were talking about it. And now, as we start to think about what the future looks like, and I want to get to that a little bit, is what do we want to try to work on in between now and next year when we get together to talk about this? But Zam, I want to give it to you as well. When we think about this from an incident command standpoint, are we seeing it used enough as, you know, we should? Are we practicing like we need to play? I mean, Jim brought up a great you know, thought about that, but I'd like to get your take on it.
It's gotten better. I think, you know, unfortunately, we've had quite a few mass casualty incidents around the country. We have them way too regularly. And I think one of the things that has done is it started a conversation. You know, agencies, you know, like Jim has mentioned, there's, you know, on the police side, I think are reaching out as our EMS and fire to at least try to get on the same page. But it takes, I think, leadership and practice. I mean, you have to go through and, you know, set time aside, set resources aside, and make sure that you're working with all the agencies involved. I know I take pride in my department. We do a very, very good job of that. We actually discovered in one of our drills that we were okay, but the hospitals were not on board with it, and the hospitals weren't ready. And so I think it doesn't matter what size community, as far as, you know, I work in a bigger municipality. And so of course there's resources there, but if you're listening to this and you're a chief, whether you're police or fire, and you're in a small district, small town, we've seen that nobody is, this can happen anywhere. And so if you're in a department of 10 people with, you know, 10 officers and 20 part-time firefighters, you guys need to get together, and all the information is there. But what I'd like to see talking next year is, yeah, this is part of not only, you know, the fire culture on permanent on-call or on career firefighters, but also on-call, volunteer. They're reaching out to the police side, and police side's reaching out to fire side, and we're on the same page for ICS. And we talk about what are we going to do if this happens in our community. And you know, it's unfortunate that it's gotten to that, but we're also in protective service, and we need to be proactive in the way that we look at these things. You know, I think Jim and Chris both mentioned we kind of were back on our heels after this happened, right? Like, we looked and said, this could never happen. Well, it did. And we did a heck of a job responding after the fact. And we were very proactive for a period of time. And I think that's gotten a little bit lax, and we need to stay on our toes, stay diligent. And I think that's one of the best ways to remember all those people that have sacrificed these events.
Yeah.
is to grow from them. And, you know, on another note of that is, as we get these incidences around the country, we need to be able to talk and share what we've learned. And, I know podcasts like what Jim does and what you do, Chris, we do that. We try to do that on Better Every Shift as well. But we can't be afraid to talk about what things we did well and what things we didn't do well to help others involved, because it doesn't happen. Hopefully it doesn't happen more than once in someone's career. Right. But I think 9/11 brought it to the forefront that it can, and it probably will in some point. So, so I really hope next year when we're talking that it's more prevalent, where agencies are working together.
And I think that's a great place to transition. And I want to go ahead and take a minute. I want to go ahead and read a little mid-show break for us. But one of the things that I want to talk about when we come back from this break, Jim, I'm going to come to you, is what the future looks like. And particularly, I want to touch on AI, because you kind of mentioned it. And Zam, I want to kind of talk about and think about what we're going to do in the future. But as we reflect on the events of September 11th, we are honored and remember those who answered the call that day, and all first responders who continue to do so today. To the firefighters, police officers, paramedic, and dispatchers who took an oath to serve, and all of those on the front line who carried out their mission when America needed them most. We salute you, remain committed to you. Thank you from the people who work at Verizon Frontline. We vow to never forget. As you perform your mission every day, inspiring our nation and those you serve. And we want to send a special thank you, all of us, to Verizon for sponsoring this crossover podcast. And they've truly been a great partner for us all. We want to thank Verizon for that. But Jim, you kind of heard the setup before we went to the read. And now we think about, what do we do, right? We're here. We're the leaders of our respected career fields. Jim, you've had years and years of being in the police service. Zam, years and years of being in the fire service. They built EMS around me, so I've been around EMS for a long time. But now when we think about sending this message out, right? We do this weekly. We send these messages out. What do we need to reflect on? So from the AI side, you brought that up, and you talked about, Jim, how it's kind of hit or miss depending on where you are. What does it need to look like for this security of our country and the success of the men and women in uniform?
Well, it's a great point to talk about. And first of all, 23 years ago, we understand there was precursor situational awareness and precursor activity that we should have paid attention to. And we're not here to blame anybody, but think of what would have happened if we did investigate some of those reports, some within the FBI, and then followed up on them. we've seen information sharing drop. We've seen big events where in open source information, we knew there was going to be a possibility of trouble, like January 6th. And we've seen some active shooter incidents where we've had leadership freeze, and there was no follow-up to ensure that someone else would take charge and take it over. So AI, we're at an advanced level now where we can tie systems together, have common operating systems and platforms. We've got crime mapping, we've got flock, ALPR, tie all them together. I interviewed a guy from Zero Eyes that will check social media or any kind of videos, live videos or archive videos, and it will pick out, the AI will pick out a firearm, even if somebody brandishes it, like 3 guys getting ready to go rob a store or a bank, and they're showing each other the guns. If it's captured on a video, that alert is sent to an analyst and then out to 911 for dispatch. I mean, that's the kind of AI that we could be using. We're not using it. Like I said before, some states have prohibited the use. And why aren't we using it? I mean, we need to move away from the political stances, the accusations of them being unfair. But license plate readers, how unfair can they be? They see a license plate, it's reported stolen, reported from a shooting, reported from some other kind of crime, and it's dispatched to cops. And yet you still have some communities fighting against it. And I think it's because we're not telling them how it works. I think the mystery is there to think that it's rigged and we're only going to oppress young men of color. And that's certainly not the case. But I mean, we've been ringing the bell. In America, just a few months ago, we had these mysterious balloons floating over the country, and we waited and waited and waited, and we finally acted. And how much information was gathered? I'm not an expert on any of that, but I think closer to home, something like 90% of the drones that we're using in America, including in police and fire agencies, are from one country, and a country that's been suspected of archiving information, recording information, taking GIS information. And so we are exposing ourselves every time we send a drone over critical infrastructure,
Sure.
or we show a tactic by our SWAT team or anything else like that. So, I mean, this is where the legislature has to move on these things. And if that's the case, then let's get rid of them. They're cheap, and that's why a lot of agencies buy them.
Sure.
But then let's replace them with something American made, something that's formatted
Could be
for
encrypted.
policing.
Yep.
Yeah, non-hackable. I talked to Blake at Brink, who's developed some great systems there. Lemur 2 is a great drone system designed just for law enforcement. Blake Resnick, he's a kid genius. And if the listeners could check out that podcast, they'll be much better informed.
We'll see if we could put that in the show notes. We'll get that over from Police Matters and throw that in the show notes so people can check it out. Because I think your point is well taken. We've got to be able to be educated on this. You know, the big things that you see these AI apps that will mess with your picture and turn you into but then the fear is everything's going to be facial recognition, and someone is putting these apps together, and now my face is somewhere that's being replicated that they can get into whatever I've used my facial recognition for. And I think that those are where the concerns were. But Zam, when we now start to think about this from a fire standpoint, we think about what AI can do to help us in the I was talking to an inspector, and he was an inspector that does just a few weeks ago, he does ships. He builds ships, right? So his job is to go in and check out all the stuff that's happening in stages. Well, through AI, he's able to put these glasses on, and he's able to look at a certain piece of the ship and see what it's supposed to look like completed. And then he's able to break this down into different stages to say, well, this isn't done, or this needs to, or whatever that is. So cool. But when we think about this from a preparation from the fire service, and we think about all the work that we have to do for safety, or even even before buildings or in the process of being built, when the inspectors go in and do. I mean, how important is this for us to think about what the next generation is going to look like? We're not working for today. We're working for the next 5 and 10 and 15 years now. And how do we need to prepare for this?
When fire, I think you hit one of the major reasons or main ways we can utilize it is for pre-incident training and pre-incident planning, using drones, even just to see where where access points are in buildings, building construction, understanding how things burn. Now everything's burning different, and even the last 20 years, we found that things are burning because of the different chemicals in which they're created. And we need to utilize technology to provide us with research. We need to have technology to provide us with, again, this pre-incident planning kind of domain. And then I also believe that we need to utilize technology on the opposite side of that, which is keeping our first responders ready from a health and wellness standpoint, is monitoring scenes for carcinogens is one way, but also there's a lot of technology that's being used in healthcare that isn't getting to fire and police, at least not economically. For cancer initiatives, even for mental health initiatives, by using even AI, we can start to recognize people that might be more susceptible for mental health issues or health issues in general. So, there's ways to embrace technology both on the response side and then on the opposite side after we respond. And that's the other part that I think, in fire, we're seeing a lot more focus with, and I think in police as well, right? I don't want to speak out of context there, Jim, but utilizing the technology on that side as well for the individual police officer, the individual fighter. I think firefighter, we need to embrace that, and medic. I'd like to even see that there are now some parameters coming up where they're using AI to see, based off of health parameters and investors, whether or not an officer or firefighter is really ready for the shift that day. Based
that's
off
interesting.
prior calls, sleep, health issues, and in some particular programming is categorizing them as yellow, red, and green, and whether they're more susceptible to injury or even mental health or anxiety issues. So I believe that as an industry, we have to start to really focus on the specific tools that can help us do our job more effectively. Because the other part of this that we haven't even addressed is after 9/11, like when we wanted to hire police and fire, the doors were open and the people were flocking in. And now we're opening the door and we're looking around and people are going,
maybe
I'm going to pass, maybe,
Yeah.
So if we can utilize AI, if we can utilize technology, help us become more efficient and effective, we need to embrace that, because we're going to start to see really this lack of not response, but you're going to start to see that we're going to have to do more with less.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And we're going to have to lean on technology. As Jim was talking about, it can help us do our job better, and it can help us stay fit and well and healthy to do what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good things that you touched on there. I wouldn't even know how to unpack that. But, on this special edition, this crossover edition of Policing Matters, Better Every Shift Inside EMS, as we reflect on 9/11 and certainly where we've been and where we're going, I do want to focus on this as we're kind of getting up there in time. It's going to be a little bit longer than our normal show, as we all got great things to opine on. But Jim, what do we need to do now in the future, right? I mean, we did a lot of stuff. You talked about, 700, 800, they're free. Talk to your chief, sheriff, and get. Back then, we didn't have to worry about it. We were all required. We all had to prove. We all had to show our certificates to make, right? So what do we do now as we think about the future, as we go forward in the next year, the next 3 years? I mean, what are we supposed to look at, and how are we supposed to keep ourselves vigilant? And, that these things, at least when they happen again, we're a little bit better prepared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it comes down to leadership, and it starts at, the president and the Department of Homeland Security and all the way down to local law enforcement. We need to have an annual audit and look at all of our supplies. We after 9/11, we looked at the supplies from the last big attack, right? World War II. And we found old, radiological stuff and water in cans that was, it had evaporated, and dosimeters that didn't work and things like that. Well, now after 9/11, we had PPEs in the trunk of every radio car and training every year. And little by little, the suits expired, the training stopped, the funds ran out, and we may be at a situation worse than before. So
Yeah.
we need that impetus to take another run at preparedness, training, exercises, PPE, equipment, and a best practices manual. And that's got to come from above so that we're all doing it the same. I mean, we've had situations where we do have mutual aid from another outside county fire department coming in, and their hoses don't connect to our hydrants, or their hoses don't connect to ours. We've got to sort all those things out so that we truly are prepared. And I think, Aaron makes some great points about fitness and mental health.
Yeah.
And the better prepared we are, the better prepared mentally we are to go into the mode of reacting and then sorting it out later, post situation, and then, bring in the mental health experts and the mental wellness people to help support our first responders.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of sum that up for everybody. I don't even know we need to talk anymore, Aaron, right? But Sam, I want to give you the same thought. I mean, from a fire side, 1 year, 3 years, I mean, how do we put ourselves back in this vigilant mode that we were once in, as we are thinking about the events that happened on 9/11? What do we get from the fire side?
I think, first, Jim hit on leadership, and he was right on. If you're a chief officer, or you're someone in that's leading kind of your group and your organization, first thing I would do is really urge you to reach out to the other departments, reach out to police, reach out to the hospitals, reach out to EMS branch, and hey, let's get together. Let's make sure we're all on the same page, and let's put ourselves in some of these scenarios, and maybe set up some trainings and make sure that everybody is as well prepared as possible. And that goes down to, do we have enough supplies? Are our supplies expired? What are we going to need if something, and doesn't have to be as large as 9/11, but some multi-casualty incident or mass casualty incident happens, and reach out again to the not only police, but if you're a fire service, reach out to your communities you do mutual aid with. Make sure you're all on the same page. And from a leadership standpoint, you don't have to have all the answers, but bring the right people into the room and come up with a plan. And then I think individually, we all need to just look in the mirror. And I was very fortunate. I've had some great mentors, and a couple of my mentors were from FDNY, and they were around that time. Everything from Chief Sulka to Frank Lido to Frank Lieb. And whenever I look at those individuals, there's something within me that I just want to be better for them and what they've had to go through. Listening to the stories, Chief Sulka tells a story where he was on the mound for the second week, and he was trying to take just a digital picture of the moon. And when he took the picture, it didn't come through. And he looked at it, he thought, God, something must be wrong with it, cleaned the lens. And what was happening was, when the flash went off, it would reflect from all the dust that was still in the air 2 weeks after. And he knew then that there was going to be other ramifications, yet they still did what they had to do. And, transferring that on to Chief Lieb, who was FDNY's head training, he just says it's up to all of us to try to get better, try to improve, try to do something to hone in our profession to provide the best service we can when we're called to do that. And that doesn't require a chief, that doesn't require leadership, that requires a mirror, and that requires you and some dedication. And so I think the other side of this, to remember those that have sacrificed and that ran up the stairs and escorted people in the eyes of danger, that you owe it to them to just try to be your best every day and to try to improve. And so I think that's the way that you keep their legacy alive. And if you ever get a chance to go to the 9/11 memorial, do it. If you get a chance to ask questions of someone, a police officer or a firefighter that was around New York at that time, even anybody who's lived in New York that was around that time, they have vivid memories and stories of how it affected them. And I think it's really important to take note of those.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, you guys hit it perfectly. I don't know what I need to add to that from an EMS side, but one of the things that I don't want to gloss over that Zam really kind of brought to light is the best way for us to remember the people who sacrificed was to do our job better and cleaner than the next guy. And we shouldn't be thinking about the events of 9/11 only on the anniversary. We should be thinking about this constantly, because these are people who went to work one spring morning, and never came home. And that could be any one of us on any given day. And we've got to be able to remember what those events meant. So, for Jim Dudley, he's the host of Policing Matters. Go ahead and check out his show. He's got a lot of great shows. He is the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour. I'm going to go ahead and say that, Jim. That's my kickoff for you. Aaron Zamzow, Janelle Fosquiet, who is co-host of Better Every Shift. And for Kelly Grayson, I'm Chris Cebollero. I do want to send a shout out to our international correspondent and host of the EMS One Stop, Rob Lawrence, who is traveling around the world, having a good time. Couldn't join us. But 9/11, man, what does it mean to you? What are you going to do to remember? And how are you going to make this a credit to the people that went before us? So I want to thank everybody for joining us on this special edition, this crossover podcast of Policing Matters, Better Every Shift, and the Inside EMS podcast. And we'll all catch you on our own networks, on our own stations in the coming week. We want to thank you for joining us.